Okay, wonderful. So, with that, we're going to get started. So, I'm really excited. This is our career panel for the iCERch program, which is the Individual Career Exploration Research Program. So, this is something out of CU Anschutz where we are helping PhD students and postdocs explore different careers in science and just what can they do with their training. So, I'm really excited to have a very wide-ranging aspect or different types of careers represented on today's career panel. So I'll let you guys each introduce yourselves one by one, and we'll just go in the order here. But just as a quick overview, we have Logan Tyler, who is currently a scientist at OnKure Therapeutics. Logan is also a CU Anschutz alumni, so we are excited to have you back with us virtually here today. Then we also have Daniel Pham, who is the director of the SPARC team and also at the Milken Institute. So really excited to hear about your work as well. Daniel also knows Aaron Golden, who is who's at the postdoc office here. And if you have ever heard of Project Bridge, then you will be excited to hear more about Daniel's career as well. We're also excited to have Omar Cabrera, who is a medical writer at Open Health and also a CU Anschutz alumni. So once again, thank you for joining us back here today. And then finally, we have Tammy Collins, who is a program officer at the Burroughs Welcome Fund. And Bruce mentioned this before we started the recording, but iCERch was originally conceptualized by Bruce and was a program that was funded in part through a grant from the Burroughs Welcome Funds. This is sort of a nice full circle moment for us here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panelists. And if you all would just give a quick, 3 to 5 minute introduction of just very generally what your role is and sort of what steps did you take to get there. And then we will hop into some more questions from the audience. So Logan, I will turn it over to you.
Sure. So can you hear me? Yeah, okay, great. Well, I think, talk about full circle. I think I was there in the first or second year of participants in this iCERch program. So I'm really happy to see it's going strong. So I'm a senior research scientist at OnKure locally in Boulder. I guess just to give some background, I worked in 2 labs in grad school actually, and I came to OnKure straight from my PhD. So first I worked with Rafe Nemanoff, studying genetics and the T cell response in an autosomal dominant polycystic kidney disease model. And then I moved to Bob Doble's lab studying mechanisms of resistance to tyrosine kinase inhibitors in lung cancer. My second lab was much more translational in nature, which I was excited about and directed towards drug discovery and drug resistance. So that was really important since I knew I wanted to go into drug discovery after grad school. So I think that really helped to land my position here at OnKure. And before grad school, I had worked in a developmental genetics lab and a drug discovery lab focused on breast cancer therapeutics. I also got a master's in epidemiology and worked for 2 years at a clinical CRO, designing and analyzing phase 3 and 4 studies. And that's the job I left to go back to grad school and back to the bench. So just a little brief background of experience that led me to OnKure. My current role is as a senior cancer biologist and pharmacologist in a drug discovery startup in Boulder. It's very fast paced and very small. It's still less than 50 people. And that's including both our discovery team, which I am on, and our development team. So that's more the clinical side. I would categorize working in a biotech startup as sort of a high risk, high reward environment. That was definitely what I was looking for coming out of grad school. So it's definitely delivering, but it may not be for everybody. We can, I guess, talk more about what that entails later on. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'm excited to hear more about your path. And also, I liked the iCERch shout out. We appreciate that. So Daniel, I will pass it off to you next.
Great, thank you. And hi, everybody, and thank you all so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be back virtually, if not in person. My name is Daniel Pham. I am a director of the Science Philanthropy Research Accelerator for Research and Collaboration, or SPARC. We're a team under the Milken Institute Strategic Philanthropy pillar. And to kind of break that down a little bit, the Milken Institute operates traditionally like a think tank. So we have ideas that are incubated in-house, and then we fund against that from outside funders. However, the SPARC model is pretty different. We operate as a consultancy model. So we work with funders, philanthropists, institutions, nonprofits that seek to uh, find funding to be to use their funding to be more impactful in various scientific and health and disease areas. So I work with them to develop a strategy to help ensure that the funding that they deliver goes beyond just to, sometimes the buildings and institutions, but really directly to scientists and clinicians to make a difference in people's lives eventually. So my main focus is in bipolar disorder. So I have worked and started at the Milken Institute to landscape the field and really understand what are the gaps and challenges in that field, and talking a lot to scientists and clinicians and people with lived experience, nonprofits, pharma, et cetera, to really develop that landscape so that the funders can understand where their money can make the biggest impact. So from there, we've worked to implement this plan through an organization called BD Squared, or Breakthrough Discoveries for Thriving with Bipolar Disorder. So right now we've committed over $100 million to improve care and research and care for bipolar disorder, and has launched about 2 or 3 years ago. So we can go into that a little bit more. From before I got to the Milken Institute, I was in policy and advocacy. So I was a lobbyist for the American Society for Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. I like to call that my screaming into the void era. Really, I think policy and advocacy is really challenging, and just, trying your best to move the needle to ensure that the scientific ecosystem has what it needs, and specifically the molecular biologists in our program. And before that, I was at Research America as a science policy fellow. Got my job pretty much directly from there. And before that, I was a graduate student at the Johns Hopkins University. That's where I met Aaron Golden. We were in the same program. I was in the neuroscience program. And like Hannah alluded to, when I was in grad school, I'll tell the story really quickly. My partner at the time, again, didn't understand anything that I did in my lab and got really frustrated with each other. Why didn't he understand my cool metaphors about neurons? Realized how bad of a science communicator I was. And if I couldn't understand, I couldn't explain what my research was to my loved ones, and how could people who have power, and that included, the scientific director, the directors of my program, all the way through legislators who made the policies about that govern science, then how can I make that difference? So I developed Project Bridge as a way for us as scientists to really explore and practice speaking to the public about our work. And have met Bruce and Aaron and others at CU Anschutz, as Project Bridge here in Colorado has really expanded and taken off in its own really special way. And thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm once again excited to hear more. Okay, Omar, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Omar Cabrera. I originally got my bachelor's degree from Princeton University, and I was tired of academia, so I just took some time off and worked in the private sector for a little bit as a database manager. I got bored with that pretty quickly, and so I went to grad school, and I got my master's in experimental psychology at the University of Louisiana, Lafayette. And I was sure I was going to be a clinical psychologist, but when I got to University of Louisiana, I realized that I love neuroscience. I mean, I absolutely fell in love with it. So that's what I pursued. I got my PhD at the University of Missouri, St. Louis, in neuroscience. And I did a lot of work over at Washington University in St. Louis, a lot of research there. And one of the professors there was he'd been there. He'd been at WashU forever. He was a very well-known researcher. I studied under him. I researched under him, and he had a bunch of research fellows that obviously went through his lab. I actually got a postdoc at Anschutz with one of his previous research fellows, doing very similar work that I was doing in grad school, which was understanding how anesthetics affect babies' brains. So I moved out to Colorado from St. Louis. I actually met Bruce. I was participated in iCERch program, also in the postdoc association in general. I was a postdoc there for 5 years, and I was just like, I want to do something else. And so the postdoc office and the career development programs there helped me take that next step. And I got a job working at Open Health, which is a medcoms company. And, I write publications, peer review publications for pharmaceutical companies. Thank you.
Awesome. I know we have quite a few people here who are very excited about science and medical writing. So thank you again for being with us. And to finish up, Tammy.
Hey, everybody. So I will also start all the way back in undergrad and sort of tell you how I came to where I'm at today. So I went to Appalachian State in the mountains of North Carolina, where I got my undergrad degree in chemistry. And I was a first generation college student and didn't really have much of an idea of exactly what I wanted to do, but I had really great mentors. It's almost like Appalachian. Some of my professors were kind of like stand-in parents, like literally mentoring me, guiding me in what to do, telling me about opportunities. And so if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have applied to grad school. And they encouraged me to apply. So I wound up, or told me about these different programs. So I applied to what at the time was a biological chemistry program at Duke University, and wound up getting my PhD there. And specifically, I wound up joining the biochem department. So it was like an umbrella program where you can rotate in different fields. And, I'll say I wasn't very involved in grad school. And so I really, in terms of like, what do I want to do next? So I made a decision that, once I went into my postdoc, I was going to get involved from day one. So I wound up doing a postdoc at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, which is part of the National Institutes of Health. And it's one of the only NIH institutes that's essentially totally outside of DC and is actually in North Carolina. So you'll see a theme. I'm a North Carolina girl. I've been stayed in North Carolina pretty much my whole life, with the exception of as an undergrad, going and living outside of DC for a research experience at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And so during my postdoc, suffice to say, long story short, I wound up becoming the head of our postdoc association at the time when the person who was running our training program wound up leaving. And so it left sort of a vacuum in leadership. And as head of the postdoc association, I didn't want our trainees to lose some of the opportunities that were, that we had. So we wound up meeting with our scientific director and leadership and, forming a workshops and training committee and trying to fill in the gap and do some of the work. So, and what this allowed me to do was to basically put into practice aspects of the job. And I was finding, I went in sort of open-minded, not sure if I wanted to continue on in research or do something else. And I was finding every day that I was really enjoying helping individuals. And, I was totally outside of my comfort zone and even leading workshops and trainings, but it was something that was just fun. So they posted the job for the vacancy as a contract position. So I applied for that and was hired. And so I wound up serving for 3 years in a contract role with Kelly Government Solutions. And then they posted it as a federal position, which is, oftentimes this is how you wind up getting federal jobs, because you're actually doing the job basically as a contractor, so that then you can apply as a Fed and say, I have all this experience. So all in all, I was in that role for a decade, where I, served in a variety of things from, helping people get experience in teaching and mentoring, leadership and management, career readiness, communication. But then you might ask, how did I wind up coming to Burroughs Wellcome? So one of the things that wound up also being my role was as a signing official for grants. And I actually was helping for 7 years people apply for K99 R00s and navigating that whole process. And so when this job came open at Burroughs Wellcome, I definitely did a lot of soul searching to say, am I going to leave what at the time seemed like a secure position in the federal government? People thought I was crazy, but I really liked the idea of being able to essentially do work as a public servant for a private foundation without some of the political interference. And 3 years later, definitely am happy that I made that decision. So in terms of what I do, it's highly varied, and we can talk about those details. But I do everything from oversee a couple of different programs in their entirety, which means putting out the RFP, fielding questions about the grant program, organizing our review committee, and we also conduct interviews. So so in a program officer position, at this particular foundation, you oversee the program in its entirety. So I oversee one that's interfaces in science. So it's for a postdoc to faculty transition program, geared to support individuals who are trained in physics, chemistry, math, those kinds of areas, and they're applying it to biological questions. So you can see how that also aligned with my own background and training. And then the other program is Innovations in Regulatory Science, which supports scientists to develop better tools or approaches that are going to help the FDA and other regulatory agencies assess the safety and efficacy of therapeutics and devices. And then, interestingly, we have actually been working with the SPARC team at the Milken Institute. You may know, Daniel, I'm not sure. I've worked with a couple of people. We've been working with the Milken Institute actually for 2 years and building out a new program centered around health equity and science. And, we haven't stood that up yet, but we've been building out the framework. And, so if you have more questions about how all that worked, I'm happy to talk about that. And aside from all this, we also have what we call ad hoc grants that are outside of like the classic competitive process that we give, as they align with some of our program areas. And we may have like 20 to 30 of those aligned with any portfolio. So this is on top of the competitive awards.
Wonderful. Thank you again. I also liked, it's a good highlight just in general with all the connections we have within the panel about how important your network is and those connections you have. I mean, science is broad, but it's also not huge. So all these connections really are important and they really do come back. So for all the iCERch participants, what you guys are doing to learn more about your careers, but also to make connections with each other, those things all help, but all count as part of your professional development. Okay, so with that, we are going to just kind of open up for Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can just see each other a little bit more. So I will, as we go, if there are any, or I'll open up to just the iCERch postdocs and grad students. If you all have any questions, you can either raise your hand or drop one in the chat. And if you're thinking, I also can get us started, but I'll give us a few seconds of think time.
I was say I took a screenshot of our image, Tammy, and I sent it to Ishida and our team.
Oh, that's great.
I love that. Okay, well, I'm going to start us off with a question then. Don't worry, guys. I came prepared with questions. I think since we just heard all about your different roles, and some of you alluded to a little bit how you got into that position, but I think this is always a question we hear frequently from trainees, which is how did you get into that first position within your field after your PhD or your postdoc? So for example, did you get a connection from someone that you knew that helped you make that inroad? Was there like a training program or a fellowship, something along those lines? So I know that it sounded like Daniel, maybe you started with a fellowship with Research America.
Yeah, and maybe I'll also share the the realness of it, it was really hard. As the last 6 months of my PhD, it was all about trying to leave, but also trying to land in a place and also finishing up your dissertation and your presentation and like getting your family to like logistically come to the presentation. And I that was the biggest struggle. And I would say I applied to about 50 to 70 jobs at that time and heard nothing back. Maybe heard back from like two or three people to say that I didn't get it. The only thing, honestly, that helped was that through Project Bridge, I did. So as a grad student, I went to a career panel kind of like this, and heard from a speaker at Research America. And at the end of it, I stayed at the end and I chatted with them to see if they would be interested in working with Project Bridge to do an activity we call Eat and Advocate. So bringing like they would pay us like $100 so I could buy donuts and coffee for grad students and postdocs so that we can make phone calls to Congress people. And that was enough so that when I applied to their fellowship, I was a known entity. And that was literally the only position I got. And so it was really hard. And I had all of this work with Project Bridge as well. I think the big problem was that I didn't understand how to do my job search. Like I applied for like directorships and things that were like way beyond that I just shouldn't have wasted my time on and didn't even know what the titles I was looking for were, right? Like I needed to look for coordinator positions or specialist positions that were like the entry level, especially into a new field. So I thought that was just really challenging. And it, like, when you like reflect back, it seems so easy, but like those are some really tough times. And it's unfortunately now even harder because of just the ecosystem is really challenging.
I guess I could chime in. I mean, I sort of alluded to mine. I obviously had a connection because I was at NIEHS, but I will say it. It wasn't. If I hadn't got involved and we hadn't formed that committee, the workshops and training committee and like setting up meetings to meet with like the deputy scientific director, we wouldn't have had that relationship already, so that whenever the job did come available and I'm applying. So, it's something that the whole getting involved aspect is, really what led to that opportunity. And then in terms of, the coming full circle. So, they mentioned how Burroughs Welcome has a grant program that actually supported this initiative. So actually knew and one of the program officers at Burroughs Welcome because of my role. And, they had formed sort of this local networking group around career development professionals. And so I would attend those. And I actually saw she tweeted out this particular job. So, that was sort of like the connection there. So there was some degree of connection, but they did, it wasn't like I was definitely going to get the job. It was just something that like, that's how I found out about it and was able to interview along with the multitude of other people that they interviewed.
Omar, did you want to step in or?
You can, okay, I'll go really quickly. Mine isn't really that long. I cold applied to a lot of places, and I did have some warm introductions to others. I didn't really hear back from any, but it was very similar to Daniel's story in that you apply to a lot of places, and now that everything's on the internet and everything's automated, and you have like all the software for scanning resumes. You'll be lucky if you hear back from two or three places that you applied to. But I happened upon Open Health. I really hit it off with a lot of the people who I interviewed with. Really great bunch of people. And the more I learned about the company, I realized it was a very structured environment, which I thought was a very good for getting work done on very tight timelines. And it was a cold application, and it just happened to work out. And I've been here for 4.5 years because I just absolutely love the company. And quick aside, my wife has a PhD in neuroscience. She worked at Research America a couple years ago. And I forgot to mention that also the specialty I'm in is schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So like Hannah said, it is a small world.
Yeah, and again, I applied straight out of grad school. Similarly, I think to what Daniel was saying, it was in the last several months as I was gearing up to, publish a paper, to get the defense going, still having all those, committee meetings and all of that. It's a very busy time. But if you have the wherewithal and the stamina to start sending out applications and reaching out to people during that period, I would highly recommend doing it before you graduate. And yeah, I think with biotech, a lot of it comes down to timing. So if any of you are curious about that space as far as jobs already, probably seen that, there'll be kind of like big booms and busts in terms of like years where there's a ton of hiring, a ton of firing. Right now, we're actually going through a real bust. A lot of large companies are firing entire divisions. A lot of small companies are shuttering their doors. So I defended in October of 2022. I actually had to argue for a full 2 weeks before I started my job here at OnKure. They were just really needing someone to fill the position. Not that I'm not tooting my own horn there. But early 2022 was like a huge hiring time. So if any of you are sort of nearing the end of your postdoc or your PhD and are anxiously just watching the trends, I was seeing all of these, friends of mine across the country getting hired into biotech roles. And I was like so eager to send out my applications, but knew it was a little too early. And by the fall time, they had really, I wouldn't say dried up completely, but they had gotten a lot more sporadic. I knew at the time I wanted to stay in the Denver Boulder area, so I was really selective with where I applied. And in particular with OnKure, there was a connection where the chief medical officer at the time had collaborated a lot with my PI, mostly on clinical trial work, but some basic and translational research. So even though I did not work with her personally, that little connection, I think, was a nice tidbit to include. So when I applied, I actually also sent a message to the recruiter directly, which I think I had to do the free trial of LinkedIn to even get the opportunity to do that. So just FYI, you can do these things economically if you time them right and you don't have to pay for the full subscription. But yeah, there's lots of little application tidbits like that are really helpful, just to get a little foot in the door. And then it was a pretty grueling interview process. Like those interviews tend to be like 7 or 8 hours long. You're doing many different interviews with people across the whole company. And then you do like a chalk talk the same way you would like for a postdoc. So yeah, I think I'm happy to answer any questions about that stuff too, offline as well if people have questions. But
I will say that my interview process was not that crazy, but we did have to do a writing test. That's pretty standard for my job.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I don't know if I have heard of industry scientist positions where they required to do a chalk talk. I wonder if maybe OnKure is just really looking for an incredibly high caliber of scientists.
yeah, I think it depends like where in industry you're going. So like, I'm not sure if for more of like a process development kind of role, maybe not. But our discovery team is quite small. So like I came in already having like kind of a fairly like leadership role. So I guess it depends what you're applying for, I think, probably.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, it looks like we have a question in the chat from Kirk. Thanks, Kirk. So he is asking, how was the transition from academia to outside academia? Were there any particular skills that served you well or that you wished you had developed sooner for that shift?
I can start. I loved the transition. I was like, oh my God, I don't have to think about work after 5 p.m. It was incredible. It was jarring still. I think, life outside of academia moves so much faster, and people expect you to just embody whatever organization you represent from day one. I got that in real time where it was my second day at Research America and I went to a briefing on the Hill and someone was like, "Hi, who are you?" And I was like, "Oh my God." I don't know my identity outside of my grad school yet. So like in that moment while I was like inside Capitol Hill talking to somebody, I like, had my suit on that I've never worn and like my feet were hurting because I'd never worn these shoes before. And I was like, had to give my elevator pitch about Research America, which I, again, was like day two, and then what my role in it was on the spot. So I think, being really quick and again, like really effectively communicating in all ways, I think is really important. And like writing, especially, I think has been really helpful and something to really be able to incubate while you're in academia. Because all I do right now, in all of the different worlds I've been in, is writing has been my number one asset.
I could chime in. So it's interesting, I guess, if you say from grad school to my postdoc and federal career, that's, it has a feeling of being academic, but you're still in the federal government. So going from a private university to federal government was definitely a culture shock in terms of, the amount of, I guess, bureaucracy and red tape. I mean, that definitely, it's like every single thing you do, you have to get approved for it at somewhere along the way. So that's just kind of from a general sense. And now going from the government to a private nonprofit, I've had the reverse where I've been steeped in like, very much a rigid environment to a very flexible, you can say that you're going to go travel to a conference and you don't have to get 5,000 signatures. So it's definitely kind of come full circle on that. But in terms of like other transitions, I'll say the experience leading the postdoc association really helped with my confidence in building leadership skills and navigating team building. And I think that's something, my husband works in industry and that's like the number one thing he talks about. And that I actually see is, truly working in this, an environment where everything is not necessarily dependent on you running a project, but you're truly working with a multitude of other people and everything kind of like comes together. So I would say that team dynamics and understanding different personality types, what motivates people just from an understanding sense, so that you don't necessarily make assumptions that someone is communicating in a certain way because they have whatever motives. That's just kind of naturally like their preference and style. So I think understanding and learning about those things was helpful. It's something that I learned while I was in my previous roles, but would have helped to probably learn earlier.
I'll say that I love the transition too. I felt like an adult finally. I absolutely love the transition. I will say that I think one of the best things that you can do in grad school or as a postdoc is learning how to write in plain language. I know we spend a lot of time writing in technical language, and to be honest, in order to write in plain language, you kind of have to master technical language first in order to be able to present that information in a plain and understandable manner. That's something I really wish I would have focused on a little bit more in grad school, because that's pretty much all I do now is write in relatively plain language.
Going a slightly different direction, I think this will go, we'll start broad. I love personality assessments. I have found those to be incredibly useful at every stage of life, not meaning like, what's your sign, but like, what is your work style? What's your Myers-Briggs or your Enneagram, yada, yada. You can find like 1,000 of these for free online. And I found those really valuable, particularly when it came to career preparedness, or I led our grad student council for a few years. And we did several like kind of career preparedness events through that. I was in the pharmacology program, so we brought back some of our alumni to give job talks. I think that's a huge area that grad students probably don't focus on enough is not just what sounds like a cool job or would make a lot of money or would maybe be in your one niche area of interest, but what your specific skill set is well attuned to. So I just bring that up because as far as the transition from academia, I actually came into academia at 26, which I was told was elderly. And I already knew coming in, I did not want to stay in academia forever. I knew I would try to avoid a postdoc if I could. I was told by literally everyone up, down, and sideways that that would never happen for me and I'd have to stay for many, many years. And I think ultimately it came down to knowing my own personality type, my day-to-day preferences in terms of work style. So much like everyone said, I found the transition really enjoyable. A startup is definitely like very intense, but it does function basically like a very well-funded, well-oiled academic lab, essentially. However, when you pivot hard. So it's definitely can be frustrating and it's not for everyone. But yeah, I found it a lot more engaging, a lot more gratifying. There wasn't so much sort of red tape or waiting around or slowness to the research like sometimes I found in academia. But yeah, there are definitely bad days too. So
That's perfect. Sarah has a question, but before we get to that, I have to make two comments. First, I love all the call outs to the postdoc association that are going on, just postdoc associations in general. I was super involved in the PDA, so was Aaron, obviously, so was Bruce. So it's just fun to hear like excitement for the PDA. We also have quite a few PDA leadership people here today. So just PDA getting stuff done. And I appreciate also like grad student council. If you're a grad student, you have those opportunities. Well, those leadership opportunities really are not just a way to give back to your community, but they're important professional experience as well. So Bruce and I always love when we hear external people reinforce some of the things that we say. So I think that's just a good reminder that those sort of extracurriculars that you're doing can be really helpful. So, okay, but we do have some. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry, Logan.
Oh, no, just to the second on, I don't remember if it was maybe Daniel or Tammy said it. I think those also give you a great opportunity to kind of get we used to call it an elevator pitch. I feel like it's a little bit of an outdated term, but just being able to, like they were saying before, like in plain language to someone, sometimes you could talk to, I had friends in the neuroscience program that they didn't give two craps about TKI resistance and lung cancer, right? But if I could explain to them what I did and why it was important, and they could explain to me theirs, that's the first, minute of your job pitch as well. So it gives you like a lot of opportunity to just chit chat with people in that way and talk about yourself and your translatable skills that otherwise, I mean, we don't really go around lab talking that way about ourselves often. So
one more plug for our postdoc association, Anschutz Postdoc Association. So my wife has a PhD, and she did a postdoc at Washington University in St. Louis, one of the best medical schools in the world and one of the most well-funded. And their postdoc association, they just sat around and drank coffee and graped. That's not helpful. You need to learn how to become a professional. If you really do want to find a job outside of academia, you do need to just nurture those different skill sets that you have. And the Anschutz Postdoc Association was absolutely fantastic for that. It was focused on career development, which is what you need, and you just don't get that at the bench.
Yeah, well, we appreciate that. Shout out to our PDA. I agree, they are phenomenal. I love how many questions we have coming in. I'm going to put an order in the chat just so you guys know. But Sarah, I saw your hand first. So Sarah, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, this is a question specifically for Omar. I'm interested, I plan to go into medical writing. I was curious about if there was anything on your resume that you feel like made you stand out to get your initial role when you were transitioning into medical writing. And then I also was curious to hear more detail about what kind of medical writing documents or content you work on in your position day to day.
Sure. So my resume, I actually don't really know. I mean, I had a nice and clean and resume. It was formatted properly, of course. I had a lot of publications that I could point to, and I think I did include like a little writing sample in my resume so that they could see. I used like the last quarter of the page so they could see like my writing style, and I do think that helped in terms of like finding writing jobs. Right now, so I do publications. So I do peer-reviewed publications. So a client will come to us with a clinical study report, which is like 1,000-page document after you run a clinical trial. And what we do is we work with the client to translate that into a publication in terms of like what their message is, what data they want to highlight, etc. I also do abstracts and I also do posters as well, scripts. If you do a video abstract, pretty much anything that is written. I've done LinkedIn posts. So it's content that is across the board, and it's on a very tight time frame. Usually, it doesn't bother me, but it's on tight time frame. So we usually go from first draft of a manuscript in 7 to 14 days. So we really do pump out a lot of abstracts and a lot of publications. I think we had like 5 or 6 publications published just last year.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, next, Udeep. Or sorry, I'll read your question since you put it in the chat. This is a question for Logan. Is it true in your experience that startups are less likely to have the legal bandwidth to hire foreign applicants? Do you know of companies in the Denver/Boulder area that are open to sponsoring work visas? Something that's been on my mind as an international student.
Yeah, that's a great question. I understand why that would be on your mind. So we have a couple folks that we've sponsored their visas. It really, I think, totally depends on where the company is at as far as for a startup. Definitely larger companies have, I think it's less legal bandwidth and more financial. I do think there's some financial aspect to taking on like an H-1B visa. I will say I'm not the most knowledgeable about that at all because I'm very lucky I haven't had to deal with it. But usually on most applications I've seen, they'll mention outright if they're sponsoring visas. And I would always recommend just reaching out to the hiring manager and asking them directly. Usually, I haven't seen that be a real obvious reason they've turned down an applicant. So if you're a real good fit for the job, usually they would pony up for it. But yeah, I would say, generally speaking, you probably have the most luck at a larger company just to get your foot in the door, especially if this is like your first industry position.
Thank you for sharing.
Okay, Jesse, you're up next.
Cool. Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful information so far. This is directed towards all of you. So thinking about the transition from academia to industry, how was the first like 6 months to 1 year in that transition? I mean, was it, like drinking from a fire hose? Did you feel comfortable? I mean, obviously there's ups and downs, but in a general sense, kind of how did that first year look for you, and were you regretting your decision within that year?
I will say that So my company was just like, when I was onboarding, they were just like, if you don't get your first manuscript within 6 months, then we'll reassess and blah, blah, blah. I got my first manuscript in 6 weeks. I got two of them. One was an HEOR manuscript, a health economics and outcomes research manuscript. It was qualitative. It was a qualitative study. I don't know anything about qualitative research at all. And then my other paper was a meta-analysis, and I was just like, oh my goodness, this thing has 150 references. What am I doing? So it was a little intense, but at each, I got really lucky, and at each stage, I had experienced people who had been in medcoms for a long time that were willing to work with me and show me the ropes and bring me along. So it was a lot of anxiety at first when I was dealing with those initial manuscripts, but I really lucked up in terms of being able to rely on two very experienced people. I mean, like both of these people on my team had 20 years or more in medical writing or medcoms. And so that really helps. So I would definitely say, like, once you get into whatever role you want, look for someone who's going to be an advocate for you and who's going to understand that you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to necessarily know what's going on at first, but that you will get it. You have a PhD. You're super smart. You will get it.
I can share, because I shifted so it was like so different, right, from academia and like biomedical, like neuroscience into advocacy. At least what I had was like when I was in grad school, I'd already done some of that work, and it was like, I noticed one of the reasons why I knew I wanted to go outside of academia was that every time I opened my computer when I was in lab, I would go on Politico.com before going into any like reading any science, right? So that was like I think that what Logan was saying, right? Like knowing thyself is really key to like narrowing down the paths. And something that I've really found to be fascinating and helpful is like if you're in a new field, one of the best ways to understand that field is to understand how that funding is how it's supported, right? So if you're at a for-profit company, like there's a bottom line, and that really ladders up and down of all of the decisions that are being made. If you're at a nonprofit, it could be grant driven, and so those incentives are really different, and that really does drive the culture. It's not just in person, which it's always funny how that's the excuse people give. It's really like these different incentives that are set up so that that company can become successful. And so what I learned is like really follow the money as one big clue about like how you might fit into that culture. It's like I worked at Nissan as like a high school student. That was like my only foray into like a for-profit company. And I remember every morning they would have like you would see the stock prices of Nissan, and that was so stressful to me. It's like every time it was red, I was like, oh my God, like are we gonna like fold? And I had no power, but that was enough for me to be like, oh, maybe like this is too financially driven. Although ironically now I work directly maybe with um, people who have money. It's just that's a totally different beast. But you kind of know better what you're getting into if you do understand these financial incentive structures.
I was just going to piggyback off of that because that's a very great point. Because where I work now is a private nonprofit foundation, which means we have a large pot of money. Right now, it's close to 900 million. And based off what we make in the investment, like how it's invested. So our finance team is like the ones who are investing it, but we give out in terms of grants the amount that we make in investments. So, the goal is to, always have it, sort of be steady so that we can give out around 45 million in grants every year. And, the pressure in terms of investment and all that is on the finance team, but we don't have pressure to, go out and solicit funds from individuals and like constantly, have donors. And so I think that's a key difference between a private nonprofit and public nonprofits, where you very much are always having to answer to your donors and say, this is what we did with the money you gave us. And so it definitely creates a different culture where you have a little bit more flexibility and freedom. I will say, just in the I absolutely love what I'm doing here at Burroughs Welcome. I didn't know, even though I had colleagues working here, I didn't fully appreciate, the freedom and flexibility that you have to shape the direction of, the research grants and funding, and like the fact that our CEO gave, me the freedom to create a whole new program. So, that freedom and flexibility is something that was very much important to me personally, knowing my own style. But yeah, I think, those comments about the funding is definitely key, and that's how it impacts working at a foundation or nonprofit.
Yeah, and I'd say, was it forget what your question, was it a trickle or a fire hose? It was definitely a fire hose the first 6 months. I also came in immediately helping out with someone that was going out on paternity leave. So I immediately took on director's work schedule. So that was a lot of luck of the draw, and partially why they needed someone to start so urgently. But I think if you are the personality type to apply to a biotech startup, that's kind of like you're into that pressure and hit the ground running kind of vibe. So it was a lot, but it was mostly excitement. And like Omar was saying, there were a lot of great mentors that I could rely on for, it's basically doing a lot of the same stuff that you would do in an academic lab setting and a lab meeting and everything, but just at kind of like faster pace and a higher scale, and it needs to look more professional, and you need to do greater depth of research in a shorter amount of time, basically. So yeah, if you like pressure and performance, it was great.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, we have a similar question around sort of a similar topic from Dama. She's asking, how is work-life balance in your positions? Do you sometimes have to bring work home? And I realize that obviously, depending on where you are in the season of your job and things like that, that might be a different answer. So maybe compared to how you felt during your PhD and during your postdoc, sort of like in general, how would you compare the work-life balance that you have now, maybe compared to what you had then?
It's so much better. It's just so much better. I mean, like, I was thinking this the other day. I'm like, thank goodness I don't have to go into the lab on a Sunday and do a research project. Like, I mean, I think Daniel mentioned this earlier, which is just like 5 o'clock comes, you shut off your computer, and then you go home, or I'm already home. So I just go downstairs. Like, I think that it's people appreciate that the work that you do, and they appreciate that you're a very intelligent person, and everyone is expected to do their jobs, and everyone does do their jobs. So like when the work is over, there's no need for you to hang out and do nothing, which kind of might be the like in academia, you don't do that, right? In industry, you just close your computer when your work is done, you go home. So like I think the work-life balance is better. It's a lot less stressful for me. You get a lot of vacation days. The pay is good. We have good benefits, and if you are good at your job, you're most likely going to have job security as well. So it doesn't even compare for me.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I think the biggest thing, like I had also alluded to, was like not having to like I didn't spend that much time in lab. I probably could have spent more. That's why I finished in like 7 years instead of we could have been shorter. I also did Project Bridge, and there was like a lot of things on my mind. But like it's the mental burden of a PhD and a postdoc, I think, well, I didn't do a postdoc, but as of a PhD, that was the hardest. Like I kept thinking about all the different things I needed to do to leave, right? Like, oh my God, like I have to do like 8,000 more experiments, probably literally, to get to the point where I could leave. And that would just really weigh on me. And I didn't realize it until I left, where, now I still work at night. I also have like two young kids that, for example, actually one of them is home right now because he's sick. So I would sign on at 9 p.m. when they're asleep, and that's fine. And as a consultancy type model, like we definitely ebb and flow with the number of projects we're on. I'm lucky where the projects I'm on have been stable, like they're like 5, 6 year projects. And so the um I control that, or I can see what those ebbs and flows are, and I can predict them a little bit more.
Yeah, I would say, well, yeah, also the work-life balance does not compare, if you compare to grad school and postdoc, it's definitely way less stressful. Basically, you don't have to work nights, but if you do, it's because you choose to. So like there are projects that I want to do, like I want to do some more in-depth evaluation of the outcomes of, where our grantees are going, what they're doing, and this type of thing. So those would be things that I would be choosing to do because I want to do it. And, so some of the extra things, might take more of your time, but and that would also say does ebb and flow. We have, seasons when we're getting prepped up to do our interviews and, get everything situated and ready for those types of meetings, or times when we have to put more time into that. And then there are other times when, we're not as busy. And sort of like Omar said, we have great benefits, great time off. So we close for basically 2 weeks in the end of December. In the summer, I didn't realize this when I signed on, but we have half day Fridays from like Memorial Day until around Labor Day, which is like, like I can't even, this is something I was like, wow, that's a thing. So yeah, that was pretty cool. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely just a way better work-life balance. And I will also say, I mean, I'm comparing my current job to my postdoc, even comparing it to my previous job. That one was more stressful than my current one. And part of it is, in that you're in a director role where you're overseeing the whole training program, and that comes with its own type of stresses where everything kind of stops with you with certain types of things. So the current role I'm in is a little bit different, and it doesn't have as much stressors that I had in the other type of role.
I'd say mine is, I think less stressful, but more rewarding, and that probably has a lot to do with finances. Getting paid a lot more to have fairly the same workload as what you had in grad school as a postdoc definitely feels a lot better. The hours day to day, they're really left up to you, at least this is a smaller group. It might be different if you worked at like Pfizer Boulder or something. But if I wanted to come in and do my work from 12 midnight till 8 a.m., and that was my preference, I could do that. Also, I'd say probably the gross majority of my office is above 50. So they tend to prefer working more like 7 to 3. So people that I work with all kind of have different hours they keep. But we do have, routine standing meetings and deliverables that we need by certain times. There's also a lot of cyclical stuff, like when we have investor calls, our quarterly reviews, things like that. When they're preparing pitch decks for BD stuff for new investors. So there's there's routine timelines, and then there are things that pop up all of the time. So it varies a lot from week to week. Additionally, because we are a smaller group, we do have our own lab on site. We call it a boutique lab. It's quite small. We don't have all of the instruments at our disposal that you would have, at Inshoots. You could go to different floors to use different equipment. We do sometimes license out equipment from CU Boulder, but oftentimes what smaller groups like ours will do is work with CROs in other countries. So that oftentimes means we will sometimes have a meeting at like 8 p.m. Or 7 a.m. or something. So yeah, it jumps around depending on what you're doing that week, or if you're really pressing for a deliverable really quickly. But yeah, as far as work-life balance, the flexibility of that, I think I do enjoy and find I can have a lot more lifetime around my work time. And yeah, the money doesn't hurt.
And just to quickly add that there is such a thing as not enough work, which happened in my previous job where I just got really bored and it was good for a while and then it became not good. I was like, oh, what am I doing here? I could be doing more. So that happened to me, and I thought that was an interesting psychological experiment.
Yeah, I tend to find that a lot more painful and hard to deal with than being a little too busy. So yeah, it kind of depends on, again, knowing yourself.
That's a great transition to our next question, which I also wanted to ask this as well. But Logan, I know you've mentioned sort of knowing yourself, personality assessments. Did you guys do Clifton Strengths or StrengthsFinder when you were in iCERch?
Well, we didn't do it in iCERch, I don't believe, but or maybe we did, and we used our ones from our orientation, our first year. I remember that being a very jarring experience because I was the only person in my group that had different strengths from everybody else in orientation. So if anybody in this group got woo on their strengths, it's a good thing, and wear that like a badge of honor.
Erin, where are you?
For that.
Woo! Erin's the one. Yeah, Erin's the woo all the time. She's the woo in our office. But yeah, so everyone in iCERch does Clifton Strengths. Exactly. And so we talked to them also about thinking about, not just the things that you are good at technically or your skills, but also your own personality and how that fits in with different careers as you're thinking about that. So we have another question here in the chat. So for all of you, what would you say are some of the main qualities or personalities that your position tend to have, or specific qualities that you think would be beneficial to have in your position?
I work with a lot of intense personalities. I'm not meaning that entirely in a negative way, although when it's like a high stress pressure cooker kind of week, it can get pretty volatile. So I would actually say the biggest strength you can have is some emotional intelligence and how to handle that. Also being able to work between groups, like I work a lot with our medicinal chemistry team, with our DMPK team, even though I'm in the biology group. So you kind of have to code switch a bit and know how to communicate. You might be communicating the same packet of data to different people, but they would highlight different parts of it that are relevant to them. And they can get agitated if you are, beating around the bush, telling them a bunch of unnecessary stuff. They just want the high points. So I think learning to kind of how to communicate with different people is really important. We oftentimes have to talk to our C-suite a lot too, which they're looking for very specific stuff when they're on calls with investors or going to their own meetings that are very different from our scientific meetings. So yeah, having a good communication ability with different groups of people is very important. Also being like very clear and concise. So if there's something you don't understand and you need more detail before you can give someone what they're asking for, knowing how to ask for that in a way that's direct but respectful, saying, this would help me to give you what you're looking for if I knew X, Y, Z and how you needed it. So I found that's sort of a soft skill, I guess, but it's hugely important and I think maybe not talked about openly enough.
I will second that because emotional intelligence is super important. Obviously everyone on this call is super smart, but no one wants to work with someone who is difficult to work with or volatile. So just being able to read the room, having that high level of professionalism at all times, being respectful of people, and being clear and concise it's super important. It's super important.
Yeah, I echo all of that. I think our SPARC team at Milken is really unique, and we've built a team that all of us are academics, are PhD trained, and we have had usually experience outside of academia, either in like a consultancy or in federal government. So it's like that one like yes and kind of thing where you know um, academics right out of grad school or a postdoc really tend to go deep too fast and not be able to crawl back up for lack of a better term. But really like, the where we sit at SPARC is both at the 50-foot level and the 50,000-foot level. And we need to be able to toggle between talking to the academics in the bipolar field to really understand how their TMS works in which brain regions, and then taking all of that information across hundreds of people and papers, distilling it, and then telling the funders this is what is happening. Because when you talk to an academic, they'll think that their project is the most important, which to them it is. And then how do we, as as advisors to funders, really be able to distill like what is actually important and what is just someone trying to pitch you their project. So it's the intuition and the ability to toggle out and back from deep in science and then immediately explain how TMS works to someone who never has heard of it.
Yeah, I think those are all, everything that everyone said really resonates. And also, I would say at Burroughs Welcome, some similar things in terms of like being able to evaluate projects, at the individual level, and then also taking that 30,000-foot view to say, where do we need to be, creating a new funding program or directing our resources more broadly and looking at, the broad patterns of what is under-resourced by larger funding bodies like NIH, NSF, being able to look across and see, what kind of trends are happening and how that impacts, your current funding model, being able to pivot quickly and, fill in gaps and support individuals, for example, in this current funding environment, having the flexibility to, modify some, or being willing to accept more flexibility on some of your grant programs. So, and I would say being comfortable, at least for me. So one of the things that we're also part of is the National Academy's Drug Forum on Drug Discovery, Development, and Translation, and Forum on Regenerative Medicine. And so, coming in and having to be comfortable being someone that's not an expert in any aspect of that, but is, trying to see the big picture of what it is that people are talking about and, like synthesize things. And that's something that I have been learning, which has been new for me in this current role. In my previous role, it was definitely much more so in the emotional intelligence. And I was mediating conflicts between individuals and, and so it was, a different type of work. And so I guess I would say those were some of the things. And I would just say, just knowing myself, one of the things that was important to me is, I really don't want to be micromanaged, and I want to have some flexibility to build something and to create something. So for me, the idea of building this new funding program and then some of the other outcomes work that I want to do will be things that I can build. But also just knowing, if you move into a position like this, you won't be the one necessarily like doing the actual research projects. So being comfortable in supporting scientists to do work without doing the work yourself and being comfortable with that.
I was just going to say, I do find that part of my job very rewarding, is being close to the science and supporting the science without being directly involved in it, you know. So it's one of the best parts of my job, because I do get to use my scientific background and everything that I learned in order to do my job. But you know, you're not necessarily in there getting your hands dirty. So I do find that very, very rewarding.
I'll add a fun practical experiment that everybody can do during Thanksgiving, is to see how many people you can talk to about your project and have them actually understand it. And so just for our work, you know, hopefully a lot of I know a lot of my colleagues can speak to all colors of the familial spectrum about their work, and you know, push it as far as they can. So it's like a good test to see like where you sit, and you know, do you get really frustrated, or do you really like to lean in when somebody challenges what you do, or just like ask questions, and what types of questions do you get really mad about, and what can you really lean into? And that again, like you don't have to change, you just that's just a way for you to realize again, like your personality, right? Like for us, we have to be able to answer all types of questions. So that might not be the job for you if like your uncle pisses you off when he doesn't understand um, mRNA vaccines.
I love that exercise. We're doing a 3-minute thesis competition coming up soon on campus. And that's something that if you're in 3-minute thesis, spoiler alert, you're going to hear that this week. But that's something we kind of challenge our participants to do as well, is use this as an opportunity to practice that elevator pitch per se.
And
Okay, so I do have, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and your emotional intelligence. Like if ever there's a time to work on it, it is family gatherings.
All right, so we do have, I have some more questions that I can finish this off with, but I wanted to make sure that as we were wrapping up, if anyone in iCERch had any other questions, now is your chance. Okay.
Well,
Okay, well then
I
I
have
think,
one if you don't mind, Hannah.
oh, yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I just popped into my head. I guess kind of a general question, but what's probably the most surprising thing that you found to be about like your current role, whether it's the role itself or how you felt about it, or something that you learned, or you know, something you thought you were going to use and then didn't, but kind of like the most surprising thing that you found?
I guess I'll go first. With a smaller biotech, it's very heavily dependent on the leadership, in terms of like how quickly you're pivoting, what gets reprioritized and how quickly. Actually, in my just 3-year tenure at OnKure, there has been a hostile takeover, and that has been a very interesting experience. So it's sort of one of those, excuse me, things you couldn't really know without having some exposure to the industry and starting to develop those connections. But it is a very small environment, science, like we were saying more broadly, and then biotech within that. One thing I was going to say unsolicited is I would highly encourage people to, rather than cold applications, I think cold contacts to people, even on LinkedIn, is actually, I've always found very positively responded to. Not things like, hey, are you hiring? But hey, you know, I am a young scientist that I think I'm interested in this type of role. How did you get to where you're at? Would you be willing to have a 10-minute conversation over coffee, whatever? I have never had someone turn those down. And I think that the more comfortable you get doing that, and the more, yes, it is an informational interview, and you can phrase it however casually or formally you'd like. But I think as long as you're really, you know, like amiable about it, you're not asking them for a job, you're just asking, you know, I'm curious what the day-to-day of your position is like, and if that's something I may be interested in the future. All of those connections actually really help a ton. And especially when it comes to like, hey, I'm thinking of applying for this other small biotech. I've already established this connection with you because of this informational interview. Do you have any insight on like, is that a good group to work for? I know they used to be at this company, now they're here, whatnot. You'd be shocked how much people are willing to chit chat about over coffee. And those things can sometimes be the most helpful information. There's also a ton of like happy hour type scenarios around like the biotech sphere in Boulder, if that's something you're interested in. So all of those things I would definitely say take advantage of, stay professional and friendly, but you can sometimes read a lot between the lines.
And I have to just jump in really quick because I would like everyone to know we did not ask Logan to say that. We just had our workshop last week about informational interviews, and everyone's homework right now is to do an informational interview. So see, it's real. Do them, guys. Thanks.
And it really is not as intimidating as it might sound, truly. It's like the same as going up to any PI and being like, hey, would you maybe want to chat about being on my committee or anything? It's that informal. You can jump on a phone call with people. I mean, I was asked to do this at 24 years old back in Boston. I was like, I can't believe someone wants an informational interview with me. I just started this job. But, people are very willing to just give a couple, highlights about their job, 10 minutes or less.
So I was going to chime in on the what surprised me thing. And I would say, some of it is, go from an institution that, like, let's say NIH has got thousands of employees. So if you're also coming from an academia, where there's thousands of employees and a huge infrastructure. So, the place I'm at now, we've got about 20 to 25 and, so that's a huge difference. So I guess I would say it's like, if there are certain things you need, like, help with communication or help with strategy around, grant programs, working with consultants and basically, having the freedom to, seek out what you need and pay for that, I would say has been something that's been, I don't know about surprising, but just something that I just have not been used to. And like just saying, okay, we can do this. We can work with this group. I want to hire someone to do X, Y, and Z, we can do that. So having that type of flexibility, that is balanced with not having like the same type of infrastructure you would have if you're at a large institution. So I would say those are things that have been surprising. And then I would also say, going from a place that has a huge amount of structure to a place with not a lot of structure. There can also be challenges that come within that, in terms of maybe not having, enough, guidance on how to do X, Y, and Z. So one of the things that we've actually been doing over the past couple of years is trying to create something that's a happy medium where there's like a sense of guidance on some things, but always providing that flexibility, because you never want to just lock yourself into doing things a certain way because everything is not going to fit that protocol. So those are things that we're doing to address some of those areas where there's sort of a lack of structure.
Let's see, a few things. Imposter syndrome never goes away. I think it gets worse. So might as well lean into it. Another thing is that I've learned that the network you make even in grad school is still so important, right? I think people go there different ways and all of a sudden you're connected and everybody's in different places and organizations. And, so just remember that even today, your network now is still really important. So keep those connections. New job possibilities. I think I never realized what was out there until I kind of moved to the first fellowship, and then I was like, oh my God, there's these other doors. I moved to a different place. Oh, there's other doors, and so then like that like hopping was like just so eye-opening. And of course, you can get some of that through your information overviews, but then I think it's so helpful to see them in action when you're in a new job. So I think it's just so cool to be able to like keep possibilities open. And then also like I've also had friends and myself, right, change careers multiple times, and that's totally okay. And like I remember feeling really anxious about like making sure that my next move outside of academia must be the perfect move. And like that's just not true at all. Like you can do whatever, and then guess what? Like it's so much easier to, well, depending on the job market, like it's easier to move to a different job as long as again you can translate your skill sets to meet those criteria. I'll stop there.
I will say the most surprising thing for me was one, how organized the infrastructure is. In terms of everything is structured. We have I had done informational interviews with people, but you just don't know until you actually get into the job and start doing it. So the structure at my company, we have like an editorial team, we have a creative team, and we have an accounts team, and we all work together to get a project done. So a project, in grad school and as a postdoc, you might have 5 people in a lab and they're all doing their own different thing. Here, you're on the same team, and you might have 15 people on the team. So that was pretty surprising to me, just how structured everything was. And also that my company was, they took seriously that we have to actually think to do our jobs. So not everything is a rush. They want us to take our time and think about what we're doing, think about what we're writing, think about it deeply so that we understand it deeply and not just like rush through something just to get something out of the door. Just, take your time and understand that. So those are 2 things for me.
That's great. That was a great question. Okay, so we are approaching the end of our time. And as I mentioned before, I am the type of personality who likes to use every single minute. So in our last few minutes, I would love to hear from each of you in like 60 seconds or less. What is some advice you would offer to a PhD or postdoc who is interested in your field? So kind of distilling down to an elevator pitch, if you will, for career advice. I realize that I didn't give you any think time on this task, so good luck.
Well, I think definitely the informational interviewing is probably one of the easiest, like little bite-sized pieces you can do of career preparedness. That plus, getting your self-understanding under control, your ability to talk about what your skills are, especially your soft skills, because of all careers, I think in science, having those soft skills is incredibly important and actually more rare than you would think. Makes you a really good candidate, whether you're going into medical writing, staying in a lab, anything. So, and yeah, I think even I wouldn't undersell, even at Anschutz, if you're interested in like my field in particular, at Anschutz, there are a lot of PIs that either have connections or they themselves are interested in starting up companies. I think the more open and honest you are in talking about what your real career goals are, the more you'll find people that are interested in talking with you about them. You don't have to tell everyone that you want to do a postdoc if you really don't want to do one. That's just for writing grants. But yeah, I think just getting more comfy talking about yourself and jobs and what you're interested in takes you a long way towards getting there. Yeah.
So I would chime in and sort of build off of like a couple of different things people have said. I used to give presentation on a framework for like thinking about navigating careers, and I call it keep steering, where it's a KEINP, where the first one is knowing and assessing yourself. And, that's one of the themes that we've been hearing people talk about today, but I think that's really the number one thing. And if there's anything, beyond your interests and skills, like really honing in on what it is that you value, because then you can use, that's only something that and then you can use that lens to have those informational interviews and ask questions based on, you know, that self-assessment you've done where you really determine what it is that you're valuing in a career, so that then you start to explore those options that align with your values, and, you know, get involved in network with individuals in those careers, and also understanding that, you know, like a program officer here at Burroughs Welcome may be completely different than this type of role in another organization. So exploring options isn't just about, you know, knowing that a program officer position exists, but it's really asking those questions about what it means in that organization at that position, because it's not always the same. And then if it's possible, you know, getting some kind of practice, or putting some aspect of that role into practice. So, you know, for medical writing, you know, we used to have individuals that would write or volunteer to write for our in-house environmental factor to build up a portfolio of samples, writing samples that were, you know, outside of a publication. And, you know, we're able to talk about working in this environment where you had, or in a deadline oriented environment, working with copy editors. So it also, you know, gave them a sense if this is the type of environment that they wanted to work in. So, you know, I would say sort of those four things: knowing and assessing yourself, exploring your options through the lens of what it is you value, getting involved in networking with others, and then, if you can, putting some aspect of things into practice.
Yeah, I think the last piece I think is so important. And I think to build off that, I think my mantra is like make your own opportunity. And that's what I had to do to get where I needed to go, you know, because there was no formal program, like you make it yourself, you know, because it might take months or years to write a publication, make your own blog, you know, start your own organization, you know, try these things as much as you can, take it as far as you can by yourself if there's no other resources around. And then that way you also learn if you like it or not. Like, then that will just better inform and narrow down your search.
I will keep my advice to medical writing. I know that a few of you are interested in a career in medical writing. I will say look online, get familiar with a clinical study report. There are examples online. You can download those and just take a look at them, get familiar with how the language is and how the data are presented, and just the regulatory document in general. Learn how to communicate in plain language. Elevator pitches, you know, in writing as well, doing presentations, getting comfortable with communication, reading papers from that are written by medical communications companies. And this one, for in general, I would say, like, use your Strength Finder. I feel like the Strength Finder was a very good tool for applying and for interviewing, because, you know, you're always going to get that question, what's your weakness? It's a dumb question, but you're always going to get it. But like Strength Finder allows you to think deeply about how you can hone your different skills, and then how you can answer that question truthfully, and by saying that, like, you know, this is a strength of mine, but here it is in its unpolished form. It may need to be polished. So that's the advice I would give you.
That's great. I love that. I love that place to finish. So once again, thank you all so much for your time. We all really, really appreciate it. And to all the iCERch participants, I encourage you to follow up and reach out to our panelists and maybe ask them for additional advice. Don't necessarily end the conversation here. But everyone, thank you again so much for your time. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.